ABC Radio Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast. Kate O'Toole is my name. It's 29 minutes to 8. The Australian American Association of Brisbane is hosting an event to honour those who served and their families. Mike Harris is the president of the Australian American Association of Brisbane. Mike, could you just tell us a little bit more about the Battle of the Coral Sea? What was happening at that time for this battle to be all of a sudden right to our north?
Well, it's because that Australia was defenceless virtually after the fall of Singapore, and consequently we had a Japanese invasion force that were heading in waters of the Coral Sea, but heading towards the Port Moresby to establish a base there in order to have a jumping off point to attack Australia and other places. And so what happened was we had nothing to defend ourselves, and the American carrier fleet, the intelligence people found out that the convoy was heading in the direction of Port Moresby, and the US convoy intercepted them, and the battle raged between the 4th and the 8th of May 1942. It raged for, say, something like 4 days, but the actual aircraft attacking each other was only probably over 2 days, but it was very vicious, and a lot of people died. We lost carriers. Well, the US lost the Lexington, USS Lexington. The Japanese lost a carrier, and I think another ship. But it was pretty desperate fighting. They often say that no one actually won that battle, but it was the battle that did cripple the Japanese fleet to a degree, and they realised that they weren't probably as armed as well as what they should be. And they actually, after the battle, they called off their invasion of Port Moresby because they thought they'd try it again later at another date when they were stronger. But unfortunately, with the later battle, the Battle of Midway, it was the one that knocked out 4 of the Japanese carriers, and no nation can afford to lose 4 carriers in a battle. But the Battle of the Coral Sea was quite significant because it was the one that saved Australia from invasion. Because, as I said, we were virtually defenceless. I think the British had their hands full in Europe, and they lost a couple of capital ships in Malaya, the Repulse and the Renown. People listening would know about that, especially the old sailors.
So I'm picturing these aircraft carriers in the Coral Sea, too far away from each other to see each other. It wasn't a direct battle of the ships itself, but having the aircraft taking off these aircraft carriers and meeting somewhere above the ocean. Is that the nature of that battle?
It was. Both carrier forces, they never sighted each other, and they never fired on each other from guns on the ships. All the fighting was done by aircraft, each trying to take out each other's ships either by aerial bombardment or through torpedoing. And it was just a battle of attrition. And I've also read where the Japanese carriers didn't have a type of compartmenting against fire inside the aircraft carrier. Like if you had a fire at one end, it quickly spread through aerial fuels right across to the other end of the ship. And a lot of the pilots were down there preparing their aircraft, and so a lot of the pilots were killed actually on the carriers, not only in the air but in the carriers themselves.
On ABC Radio Brisbane and Sunshine Coast, my name's Kate O'Toole, and you're hearing from Mike Harris, who's the president of the Australian American Association of Brisbane. And there is an event this morning from 10 o'clock this morning at Newstead Park in Newstead in Brisbane to acknowledge this event that happened, this battle 80 years ago today. But Mike, before we get the details of that event, another point of significance about the Battle of the Coral Sea is this cooperation between Australia and America.
Yes, well, that goes back to World War One in the trenches. American troops, I think they came into the war about a year before the end of the war, but they were very much involved in many of the battles that went on in France. So the mateship began in the First World War, and after that, in the Second World War, very much involved with American troops. And, they've sort of supported us, and we've supported them in various encounters in Southeast Asia over the years. I mean, the fighting was vicious, as I said, and the Japanese were well entrenched in the islands. My father fought in Milne Bay, and they were attacked by a fleet of warships that dropped the troops off in the wrong place, and the Aussies were able to get the upper hand with the American forces they fought with in Milne Bay. And as the Japanese were coming across the airfield, they got caught in a crossfire of American and Australian machine gunners. My father was one of the machine gunners, and he helped look for the stragglers in the jungle afterwards. The Japanese lost that battle. Then they took troops from there, the ones that they could get back on the ship. They took them to fight in the Solomons, where my father later fought against the Japanese. But a subsequent place was Guadalcanal. That was where I think a lot of the fighting was done by Marines, the Japanese Marines, and also the the American Marines and Australian soldiers in the Solomons and Guadalcanal, which is part of that island chain. You know, that battle was fought, the Battle of Coral Sea was fought 800 kilometres off our coastline. If you're sitting on the beach there at Coolangatta, looking out sort of northeast, if you were to go 800 kilometres out, that's where the battle was. It was so close to us.
Mike, what's happening today at 10 o'clock?